Well, you'll hear a strange sound drop to the ground.
A sound? Like what?
Like that.
The cowboy. This gritty, hard-working man who travels the Wild West on horseback. A brave conqueror, a fierce fighter, a gunslinger, a survivor. It became such a powerful and revealing American myth.
He not only plays, he can shoot too.
I recently became extremely interested in cowboys, mostly because I just finished playing Red Dead Redemption 2, which I found super immersive. I even started reading this Western book by Louis L'Amour, and it really isn't that good. I find the cowboy world kind of corny, but nonetheless fascinating because it isn't just any myth. It's an American myth which is still used decades after its creation to embody the spirit of Americanism by idealizing ideas such as individualism or every man for himself, freedom, ruggedness, guns, violence, greed, and finally, America's territory being a land of opportunity to conquer. And all of this is interesting because many of these cowboy values are actually linked to capitalist values. For example, the cowboy is idealized as a tool of colonialism, fighting indigenous peoples for land, territory, and resources. In that perspective, cowboys make for great capitalists. The Wild West is the epitome of a capitalist world, an individualist culture where everyone is in competition with one another to accumulate as many resources as possible. The justification for mutual aid isn't solidarity, but personal gain. If somebody helps someone else, it isn't out of love for humanity or out of generosity. It's because they're getting something out of it. Paying for someone else's healthcare, paying for someone else's higher education, they have to work for it, and if they can't, too bad. This is the Wild West. If you can't fend off for yourself, you'll die. In the Wild West, and it's pretty much the same under capitalism, individuality is strength, cooperation or solidarity is weakness. I have a quote here illustrating this idea in Louis L'Amour's North to the Rails. It goes, "Lying there in the darkness, he felt suddenly very much alone, but he remembered something his father had said. Don't ever be afraid of being alone, boy. The strongest man is he who stands alone." And then Pa had added, "To just that extent that you lean on somebody or rely on them, to that extent you are a weaker man." So the legend of the cowboy justifies and strengthens America's highly capitalistic culture. I would argue that it's a strong conservative icon which defends individualism, very often racism, especially against indigenous peoples, and violence.
Out here, you don't see many fences. The land stretches out forever.
It's not a surprise that in the 50s, the very popular Marlboro cigarette brand created the Marlboro Man, an ideal American man, a rugged, tough, hard-working cowboy.
Marlboro country.
Marlboro pushed the legend to its fullest, idealizing the cowboy, making him smoke, and then selling you the idea that if you smoke, you yourself become the cowboy. You become an American legend. Marlboro made cowboys culturally omnipresent through advertisement in the second half of the 20th century. So it's not surprising to know that the first photograph to have ever sold on the art market for over $1 million was a picture of a cowboy. It's an Untitled picture made by Richard Prince in 1989. This video could end here. Here's a picture of a cowboy that somehow sold for over $1 million. Cowboys are a capitalist icon, the art market is an example of lavishness, and there's that. But there's more to it. So much more. This photo is surprisingly, extremely controversial. Richard Prince did not take a picture of the cowboy in the moment. He did not hire a model, and he did not go out in the wilderness. He took this picture by photographing an advertisement in a magazine featuring the Marlboro Man. This, of course, had legal ramifications. Is it legal for Prince to take a photo of a photo and sell it? Is he making money off of somebody else's work? Is he making money off of somebody else's creativity? Many people would say that he is, and on the internet, he's been called a thief numerous times, and perhaps that's not completely unwarranted. The original photographers behind the Marlboro pictures were clearly upset by Prince's theft, or as he called it, appropriation. But why? I mean, it isn't even the photographers' pictures anymore, but Marlboro's. These photographers weren't even given credit for these pictures, both for the ad or the artwork. These pictures would never bring them recognition or fame. The photographers gave up the authorship of their creations for an amount of money. They sold their authorship. Under capitalism, everything has a price. Because of that, they never got recognition for their work, and companies are profiting from it. But that's a pretty standard practice under capitalism. Think of all the recent innovations in pretty much any industry. There are thousands of creators behind them, but the one entity which takes the credit for such innovations is the corporation. Scientists, engineers, creators, they all contribute to make a specific innovation, but they get no credit for it. Corporations get the credit, and it helps them become more acceptable to the public. But a corporation buying a photographer's authorship, though it might sound very strange, is very different from an artist appropriating a picture. So Richard Prince did photograph someone else's picture, called it his, and then sold it for a fortune. But how did he justify it, and how did he get away with it? Well, the whole work is actually a process called appropriation, and put simply, appropriation is taking an object, changing its context, and through this change of context, the object, or our perception of it, is different. This change between what the object first was and what the object became is the art. This recontextualization has been made countless times throughout art history. Marcel Duchamp's fountain is a great example of this recontextualization, but he also appropriated the Mona Lisa in Elle a chaud au cul by changing its context and giving the subject facial hair. Andy Warhol recontextualized the image of Campbell's soup cans, changing its context from a product on a shelf to a painting on a wall. Warhol's Monroe prints are also an appropriation from an advertisement for the movie Niagara, made in 1953. Here, Richard Prince's cowboy turned from being a tool of commercialism, a symbol to sell tobacco, to a simple cowboy and the myth it represents. This recontextualization raises many interesting questions. Who and what shapes our culture? The images we're constantly being bombarded with, the art we are exposed to on a daily basis, is advertisement. How does that affect us? Why is a specific icon so popular? Because someone with a lot of power made it so. Someone with capital paid for this image to be a cultural one. So who shapes our culture? The people who have enough power to do so. The people with capital. Why would they invest in shaping culture? To make a profit. So what shapes our culture? The profit motive. What are the ideas and the values conveyed by these advertisements, and who profits from such ideas becoming mainstream? By taking the Marlboro Man out of the Marlboro context, you see what is truly being sold to us. You see what our culture is, what it's projecting, what it's telling us, what values it promotes. You see the influence of capitalism in our culture. Richard Prince is a great commentator of capitalism, but don't get me wrong, he's also its product. He ultimately made millions by selling somebody else's work in a different context. He's a great example of what capitalism can create. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think of the whole Richard Prince controversy. I'm really interested in knowing what you all think. And as always, I'd like to thank You Design I Write and all my other patrons for the support. If you wish to join them in supporting this channel, check out patreon.com/thecanvas.